Coming up on Cannabis Coast to Coast News with Alaina Pinto this week, a bipartisan push for legalization as the States Act 2.0 gets reintroduced on the U.S. House floor, paving the way for legalization, descheduling, no 280E, and interstate commerce. If the act is passed, it would ease federal regulations and allow legal states to have their own laws and regulations. Plus, Americans are consuming more cannabis than ever during the first 100 days of the Trump administration rule as people's anxiety grows over the daily policy changes and shakeups at the federal level. Is anyone surprised about this? That was the headline on GreenState.com's Cara Wietstock's article this past week, and we talked with the author.
If the administration, and I'm going to kick myself for saying this, if they can see a glut of money to be had, I think they would act, but at what cost?
And check out this picture. Comedian Bill Maher, Kid Rock, Joe Rogan, and the UFC's Dana White had lunch with President Trump this past week as Bill Maher does an about-face on the president and tries to humanize the guy behind closed doors.
3, 2,
How about some expansion news in Massachusetts as Lazy River Products opens their second dispensary in Tewksbury? All that and more on Cannabis Coast to Coast News with Alaina Pinto next.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Cannabis Coast to Coast News, PCM TV's weekly production documenting the fight to end cannabis prohibition in our time. I'm Alaina Pinto. On the screen is the QR code that will take you to our app, PCM TV. There you will find this program before we even live stream it out to the world on Mondays at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. So go to the App Store or Google Play and get it today. This past Thursday, a bipartisan group of congressmen introduced the States Act for a third time. The strengthening of the 10th Amendment through the Entrusting States Act was introduced to the 116th Congress in 2019, then reintroduced in the 118th Congress in December of 2023. Now, in the 119th Congress, Republican Congressman Joyce joined with his fellow GOP rep Max Miller and Democrat Dina Titus to put forth a bill that would legalize cannabis and set up a regulatory body that would report to the Alcohol, Tobacco, Tax, and Trade Bureau that would work in conjunction with the FDA to come up with guidelines that completely descheduled cannabis away from the CSA. Since this title of the bill is the States Act, part of this legalization allows each state to set up their own regulations, like 24 of the existing adult use legal states right now. Furthermore, it will classify cannabis products into specific categories such as drug, food, dietary supplements, cosmetics, and set standards for contaminants testing, manufacturing, and marketing practices. Joyce released this statement about his new bill. Whether a state is pro-legalization or anti-legalization, we can all agree that the current federal approach to cannabis policy is not working. As President Trump has acknowledged, the existing policy has caused unnecessary harm and squandered taxpayer dollars by diverting law enforcement resources from combating violent crimes to making needless arrests and facilitating incarcerations for small possessions of state legal marijuana. Joyce is also co-chair of the Congressional Cannabis Caucus, and he goes on to say, the state's 2.0 Act remedies this issue by bridging the gap between federal and state policy to create a more logical approach to cannabis regulation that allows each state to put the policies in place that work best for their communities and unique needs. Senator Elizabeth Warren from Massachusetts introduced the first States Act in 2016, and it will be interesting to see how the Democrats in both houses of Congress react to this now with the Republicans in control. With an analysis of its chances to pass in its current form or with other amendments, here's Andrew Behringer in Washington, D.C.
I'm Andrew Behringer with the Washington, D.C. report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Last week in Washington, D.C., a bipartisan group of lawmakers has reintroduced legislation that could significantly change federal cannabis policy across the country. The bill aims to respect states' rights while creating basic federal guidelines. Both Republican and Democratic lawmakers joined forces to reintroduce the STATES Act, or States 2.0 Act. The bill's key sponsors include Ohio Republicans Dave Joyce and Max Miller, along with Nevada Democrat Dina Titus. Joyce and Titus both serve as co-chairs of the Congressional Cannabis Caucus. This legislation would fundamentally change how federal law interacts with the state cannabis programs. Currently, cannabis remains federally illegal, even in states that have legalized it. This bill would amend the Controlled Substance Act to protect individuals and businesses operating legal under state or tribal laws from federal prosecution. Additionally, the bill would legalize interstate cannabis commerce, normalize tax policy for cannabis businesses, and establish a regulatory framework overseen by the Alcohol and Tobacco Tax and Trade Bureau. The legislation comes at a time when public support for cannabis reform continues to grow. A recent GOP poll shows that even a majority of Republicans now favor cannabis reform, particularly policies that allow states to set their own cannabis laws without federal interference. Despite President Trump's previous expressions of support for a states' rights approach to cannabis, the White House officials recently indicated no immediate action is planned on cannabis reform or rescheduling. Former DEA and HHS officials suggest that without the president's active advocacy, comprehensive cannabis reform would face prolonged delays. If passed, the Attorney General would have 180 days to update federal drug regulations, while the Government Accountability Office would conduct research on how legalization affects traffic safety. Well, that's the Washington, D.C. report. I'm Andrew Behringer reporting.
So, is anyone a little anxious about what is going on in Washington, D.C. under President Trump? Stock market reacts to every word that comes out of his mouth. And if you are a foreign national or citizen, you are probably worried about the new immigration policy and if you will be targeted. So as you might expect, Americans who are anxious tend to consume more cannabis to combat that anxiety. Cara Wietstock is a writer with greenstate.com, and her headline sums up her story this week. It caught the eye of our executive producer, Jimmy Young, and he talked with Cara about the results of the Harris poll funded by the Royal Queen Seeds Company. Here they are.
Thanks, Alaina. We have a very special person joining us here on Cannabis Coast to Coast News this week. It's Cara Wietstock, a writer for greenstate.com. And this week, she wrote an article for greenstate.com that the headline caught my eye, okay? Because the headline was the unexpected impact Trump is having on weed. Cara joins us now. And Cara, explain to me how you came upon this survey that you talked about.
The survey was sent to me by Royal Queen Seeds, so it was a classic combination of brands and journalists, but it wasn't actually focused on this tidbit that we shared. It was focused on consumer trust in products. They want to grow their own weed because they don't really trust that which is on sale right now at stores for being clean from pesticides and whatnot. And then at the very end, they shared that they asked one question if they are consuming more cannabis now that Trump is in office. And that is what most of us journalists grabbed onto because it's a very livable moment. And the answer was yes. Unfortunately, I asked and there were no backup questions because this was just a one-off added on to the main probe, which was growing cannabis trust and consumer trust. And I want to know more. So I'm hoping that they take our interest to heart and they ask some more questions about that on their next run. But essentially, there are more people are turning to cannabis in these last few months. Anxiety is very high and has been since the election run started. And that's what the article details.
Absolutely. And I would be remiss if I did not explain that you have one of your pets on your lap, and we
He
see.
literally left as you
Okay,
as I
but as soon as
talked.
it started recording, right? But that was a cattail, just so you know. It's not an appendage that Cara is growing.
No, I'm all human being.
And look, everybody, whether you are in the cannabis side of things or not, is anxious because you just don't know what this guy's going to do. And he's unpredictable and he's
Mhm.
whatever else you want to put in there as well. However, his ego drives him. And I still have faith that when he sees an opportunity to become a hero and feed his ego that, hey, I'm the guy who brought regulatory stability to this industry.
Mhm.
This will, I think, will drive him into getting this thing done or telling his disciples to get it done. And it also coincides with the fact that the States Act is back in Congress again. That this bill
Yeah.
that would allow legalization to happen is now, being talked about in Washington D.C. So, I'm a hopeful guy, generally positive, right? So I'm
Mhm.
always looking for something that is going to give the industry some kind of hope, something to look forward to. And
Yeah.
I can certainly get your opinion on that, can't I? What I just said.
Yeah, I'm feeling the weight of it and I'm digesting, but I wish I had faith and trust
Hmm.
in acting in the better interest of cannabis. I started working in this industry in 2011, and I was bright-eyed with, oh, legalization will help everything. And um, as I've watched states favor taxation over patients, taxation over home grows, it does not seem to be that people are the concern. So if the administration, and I'm gonna kick myself for saying this, if they can see a glut of money to be had, I think they would act, but at what cost?
Cara, thank you so much for taking a little time out of your Good Friday to join us. And we look forward to more from greenstate.com.
Thank you for having me.
There were some more fireworks out of Washington, D.C. this past week, and they weren't from President Trump. This time, they were by Health and Human Services Director Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who has angered the autism community in this country with his harmful remarks. It was at the same news conference where Kennedy announced that he would find a cause for autism in the next 5 months, and he believes it is totally environmental. Then he made these completely hurtful and insensitive remarks when talking about the challenges facing parents of kids on the autism spectrum. He said, "These are kids who will never pay taxes. They'll never hold a job. They'll never play baseball. They'll never write a poem. They'll never go on a date. Many of them will never use a toilet unassisted. And we need to recognize that we are doing this to our children." End quote. Our Michigan correspondent is Amy Carter of the Michigan Wheatsters and the mother of an 18-year-old autistic child. Jaden is his name. Amy is still fighting for the rights of autistic students to use cannabinoid-based medicine delivered by registered nurses at school. She has driven to Jaden's school for years to take him out of school, go 1,000 feet away from school to administer his medicine so he can return without any danger of outbursts and uncontrolled behavior. Needless to say, Amy's experience with Jaden counters everything RFK Jr. said.
My son Jaden has conquered milestones I never imagined possible. I contribute the majority of his success to cannabis. It has helped to improve his IQ and reduce his challenges. He plays baseball and football, works, and pays taxes. If you're a parent of a child with autism, your life isn't ruined. It can be tough, but I feel blessed. What I've always told Jaden is that he has superpowers, like heightened hearing and incredible memory. It's crucial to recognize that they grow into autistic adults who have unique needs. Critically, the struggles many face stem from the lack of support, not autism itself. Autism requires tailored assistance, and when support is limited, families suffer. It's important not to generalize experiences. Not every autistic child regresses or will struggle with employment. Many adults, including my son, hold jobs and contribute to society. We need to focus on the realities and needs of the autistic community instead of framing them as burdens. There's no cure in sight, but access to support is vital for these children and adults. Now let's work together to advocate for the help they really need.
That's Amy Carter from the Michigan Weedsters, who, while is one of the driving forces for advocacy in that state, she is most proud of the fact that she is known as Jaden's mom. On Easter Sunday, Massachusetts Senator Elizabeth Warren has called for RFK Jr. to resign from his position as the Director of Health and Human Services after his hurtful remarks. Kennedy did back off his comments a bit by saying he was only referring to the 25% of autistic children who are nonverbal. No word on whether he will even respond to Senator Warren's request to resign, so stay tuned. The National Institute of Health announced for the formation of a resource center for cannabis and cannabinoid research. Once again, it will be located at the University of Mississippi, where the nation's only legal growing center lived for many years, even during Prohibition. And now, in conjunction with Washington State University and the U.S. Pharmacopoeia, the Resource Center will continue its research work on the many cannabinoids still being discovered in the plant. Of course, that is contingent that their funding doesn't get taken away. But now let's check out what is going on in Arizona with Karen Black, where that state continues to see declining sales. Here's Karen.
I'm Karen Black from Greenfinger Consulting with the Arizona Cannabis Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Arizona's cannabis industry is facing its second straight year of declining sales, with total revenue dropping from a 2022 high of over $1.4 billion to about $1.26 billion in 2024, an 11% decrease year over year. Medical sales have been hit hardest, plunging nearly 32% last year, while adult use sales dipped by about 4.5%. There is a glimmer of hope. March 2025 sales were up nearly 10% from February. However, they were down the same amount compared to last year. Average item prices have stabilized and total units sold rose to 5.8 million in March, but profit margins remain tight due to high taxes and continued competition from illicit sellers. At the state capitol, 4 cannabis bills remain alive and 2 advanced this week. One about rural opportunity and dual licensees now heads to the House Minority Caucus. The other, which mandates medical marijuana funds be used for clinical research grants, is moving to the House Committee of the Whole. A bill tightening cannabis advertising restrictions awaits Senate action. The fourth, which would allow cannabis tax money to be used interchangeably between 2 funds, is stalled in committee. On a more positive note, Arizona has shortened the required period police recruits must abstain from consuming cannabis before being hired from 2 years to 6 months, further easing past restrictions. Previous lifetime and age-based use limits have also been removed, perhaps reflecting changing attitudes toward cannabis in the state. Different from the typical 420 sales promotions, Giving Tree Dispensary in North Phoenix marked the holiday with 420 acts of kindness, encouraging staff and customers to complete 420 good deeds before April 20th, shifting the holiday's focus from sales to community and compassion. And lastly, Earth Extract and Earth's Healing dominated the Tucson Weekly Cannabis Bowl, winning 4 and 3 awards respectively. That's all for this week's Arizona Report. I'm Karen Black from Greenfinger Consulting reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
As we start to do more and more research on the medicinal values of cannabis, it's just a matter of time before a cure or a new treatment for cancer is discovered to combat that horrible disease. Now, Kimmie Cannabis has a story about a research study that might be the first big step coming out of her state of Oklahoma.
I am Kimmie Cannabis from Can I Talk About It with the Oklahoma update for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. In the world of cannabis and cancer care, a major milestone is making global headlines. Oklahoma's very own Jamie Bennett, formerly known as RSO Mama, and Jim Garanser of Texas, alongside their incredible team at the Cancer Playbook, powered by Whole Health Oncology Institute, have launched a groundbreaking meta-analysis on medical cannabis outcomes and associations with cancer. And the media response? massive. In just a few days, the press release has reached an estimated 495 million people as of April 18th. That's right, 495 million. It's been featured on major platforms like Associated Press, Yahoo Finance, Investor Place, and even The Guardian and Politico. Syndicated in over 100 outlets worldwide, from Latin America to France, Italy, and Brazil, and across cannabis medical and financial platforms alike. This research lays foundation for the next evolution, the Playbook Agent, an interactive tool that helps cancer patients get answers about cannabis, symptom relief, and real-world outcomes, all backed by science. The meta-analysis has already outperformed 73% of all articles in Frontiers in Oncology, and it's only been out for a few days. As Jamie and Jim put it best, we're proud of how far we've come and even more excited about what's ahead. This isn't just news, it's a shift in the conversation about cannabis, compassion, and cancer care. Please stay tuned for our upcoming one-on-one interview right here on Cannabis Coast to Coast News. That's it for Oklahoma Update. Peace, love, and all that good stuff.
That'll do it for the A block, or first section of this week's Cannabis Coast to Coast News. In the B block, we go international with our European report. And we'll start our state reports in Illinois with the clone guy, Mark Allen, after those international reports. Coming up next on Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
You are allowed to gift marijuana to people of legal age here in the state of Illinois.
Ready to take your craft to the next level? Imagine faster extractions, purer products, and more profits. Sounds good, right? At Pure 5 Extraction, we've revolutionized cannabis extraction with our game-changing technology. No solvents, no heat, just the cleanest, most natural process on the market. Whether you're a boutique grower or a large-scale operation, Pure 5 has the tools to elevate your business worldwide. Visit pure5extraction.com today. Pure 5 Extraction, because your plants deserve the best.
Welcome back to Cannabis Coast to Coast News. I'm Alaina Pinto. This is the part of the show where we go across the pond to Europe to see what's going on over there when it comes to cannabis and hemp products. This week, Italy basically shut down the hemp industry in that country and turned it into a criminal endeavor. Ben Stevens from the Business of Cannabis in Europe has that story.
I'm Ben Stevens with Business of Cannabis with this week's news from Europe for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. This week, the Italian hemp industry, already on its knees, has been dealt a second and probably fatal blow. Last week, the Meloni government pushed through legislation under emergency rules, meaning that it effectively bypassed Parliament and was implemented overnight, which equated all hemp flower, so hemp for our purposes is any cannabis with less than 0.3% THC, with high THC cannabis, making the entire industry effectively criminal overnight, wiping out some 2 billion euros worth of revenue for the Italian economy and making some 30,000 people supported by this industry criminals. So the one reprieve following last week's ruling was that CBD products, CBD oils made from the seeds and stalks of hemp were effectively exempt from this ruling because it only covers hemp flower. In a separate ruling this week in the Court of Appeals, in a case that's been going since 2020, in a massive U-turn from the court, who has rejected this bill twice because of the lack of scientific evidence, all CBD oils, regardless of how they're made, even if they're made from seeds and stalks, are now also considered a narcotic, meaning they cannot be bought from pharmacies over the counter, they can't be bought from hemp shops, they must be prescribed by a medical professional. Now, some court cases and challenges are already being brought by the industry, but for now it looks like the industry is effectively done. Very disappointing news from Europe, but that's all from me this week. I'm Ben Stevens with Business of Cannabis, reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
Whether you are a fan of former heavyweight champion Mike Tyson or not, he has jumped into the cannabis industry and built one of the most successful celebrity brands with his cannabis company, Karma Hold. Tyson said his company was built on the belief that powerful stories and products can change how people connect with wellness, entertainment, and culture. So now, if that brand fails, it will be his fault and responsibility, since this week he named himself the company CEO. In California, Dina Naguib has the story of a lab in the Golden State that continues to be in trouble with that state's regulators. Here's Dina.
I'm Dina Naguib, Principal Consultant at Grass Goddess Consulting, here to give you the latest news in Southern California for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Last week, the Department of Cannabis Control said that it's suspending the license of a cannabis testing facility, Bel Costa Labs Long Beach, as it has engaged in activity that puts public health, safety, and welfare at risk. The specific issues are failing to accurately report microbial impurities, inaccurate cannabinoid potency reporting, not collecting representative samples, incomplete chain of custody forms, abuse of track and trace login credentials, and insufficient training or experience of lab workers. The DCC directed the lab to cease operations immediately. In other news, there was a rally at LA City Hall last Wednesday, organized by the Black Los Angeles Cannabis Council, to show the city that the way social equity has been handled for the past 7 years is unacceptable. Rally goers are fed up with the Department of Cannabis regulation and presented a list of issues, specifically how the social equity funds have been mismanaged, how licenses have been delayed, policies that have favored non-minority businesses, resources promised were not delivered, allowing the illegal market to persist, and insane tax burdens. At the rally, Elliot Lewis from Catalyst spoke and announced that his operation would stop paying the city of LA any taxes effective immediately in protest, and asked others to join. Social equity programs have been mismanaged and the industry is fed up. I'm Dina Naguib from Grass Goddess Consulting, reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
There's another athlete who's bringing his brand to the city of New York, where he played for 7 years. It's Carmelo Anthony. The first ballot Hall of Famer has teamed up with cannabis entrepreneur Jesse Horton and creative director Brandon Drew Jordan Pierce. Carmelo is excited to bring this craft cannabis brand to the Big Apple. Should be good. We'll wait and see. Now let's check in Chicago with the Chicago clone guy, Mark Allen, who is all excited about his state of Illinois allowing the legal gifting of cannabis. Here's Mark.
What's up, everybody? I'm Mark Allen, the Chicago clone guy, reporting from just outside of Chicago, Illinois. This is Bird. Thanks for tuning in to Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Always something going on here in Illinois. Illinois is now launching their new registration portal for current and new medical patients or people that want to be medical patients. They're transitioning from an old system into what we believe is going to be an extension pretty much of Salesforce. So we'll see how this goes. I've had experience with Salesforce in the past, and sometimes it's good and sometimes it's confusing, so I'm sure it will be interesting. But I've actually gone online and actually already had to re-register because we had to get new usernames and passwords. So I went on and redid that, but I didn't see anything specific that said I had to, even though I know I have to. So I'm sure there's going to be some issues coming up with that new transition to that system. But, growing pains with anything new, with technology. In other news, the state was questioned if gifting marijuana to other, people 21 of age or older was legal. So, long story short, they put their money where their mouth is, and the state literally put in writing that you are allowed to gift marijuana to people of legal age here in the state of Illinois. And if you are ever in Illinois, I think you should gift it to me. Hit me in the messages. Just kidding. But no, I'm not. Anyways, that's pretty cool news. Also, some things going on. We reported recently that Metric is going to be the new seed to sale system for all the commercial grows and facilities and dispensaries. That's actually going to be starting July 1st. Word through the grapevine is that this system's got some problems. So we're going to see what happens with that. The people on the inside are saying that it's going to create more costs, it's going to create more training, more confusion. And they're also saying that the RFID tag chips that the state says are going to be free and no charge are expensive and going to be an issue. But time will tell with that. But that sums up the news for just outside of Chicago and surrounding Illinois areas for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. I'm Mark Allen, the Chicago Clone Guy. Chicago Clone Guy checking out. Take care.
In New York this week, NYC Hybrid has filed a lawsuit challenging that state's labor peace agreement provisions. Having an active labor peace agreement is part of that state's regulations for the industry. NYC Hybrid operates a dispensary called Gotham, located in Brooklyn. Now, let's check in on Oregon and see if the violent crime wave targeting cannabis businesses has eased at all. Here's Marianne Kersagi with that story.
I'm Marianne from Alibi with the Oregon Cannabis Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. 420 is shaping up to be a fantastic weekend here in the Northwest. Sunny skies and blue skies are making everything smell and look like spring. Saturday is the OG Invitational Competition, where judges blind test flower and a winner is announced. Winning in Oregon is a huge deal, as Oregon is known for its craft quality flower. Next, the OLCC continues to publicize its report on intoxicating hemp products. In addition to regulating cannabis and liquor, the OLCC is now pushing to have regulatory powers over hemp. Oregon is already one of the most restrictive states, so this seems to be another excuse to hamper the cannabis industry. And finally, legendary Oregon brand Alibi is now available in New York. Alibi participated in the Latinas in Cannabis event at Happy Monkey and is available in licensed retailers around the state. That's the Oregon Cannabis Report. I'm Marianne with Alibi for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
In Maryland this week, lawmakers were busy. That state is still trying to figure out how to run their own social consumption lounges, which continues to be a challenge everywhere in the United States. Plus, regulators are tweaking some more rules and regulations about the exchange of weed from employers to employees. Here's Christopher Bright in Maryland.
Welcome to Cannabis Coast to Coast News. I'm Christopher Bright from The Enlightened Voice, bringing you the latest cannabis headlines from Maryland. Maryland lawmakers have passed a bill clarifying rules for marijuana consumption lounges and revising cannabis business regulations, now awaiting the governor's signature. The measure, backed by the Maryland Cannabis Administration, defines policies for on-site consumption sites, allowing cannabinoid beverages with up to 5 milligrams of THC per serving. Lounges can operate as a food service facilities offering non-infused food alongside marijuana products, but must secure building and occupancy permits. Localities can ban indoor smoking or vaping, though outdoor use may be permitted. The bill also greenlights a second cannabis licensing lottery, depending on a disparity study to check for discrimination against minority and women-owned firms. Up to 25 growers, 25 processors, and 120 dispensary licenses could be issued, plus 10 incubation spaces and 15 consumption lounges. Additionally, cannabis license holders can now sell their business to employees, bypassing a 5-year waiting period. Medical dispensaries get an extension to deliver products until July 2026. And now we celebrate our content creator of the week. I would like to shine a spotlight on Dexter, aka Nerdy Stoner Podcast, or Chef Bois Dex. Dexter is a breath of fresh air, bridging the gaps between black nerds and stoner culture. Whether you enjoy his witty banter on his podcast, seeing him in cosplay at your favorite con while interviewing people, or just looking at his mouth-watering dishes, Dexter has a little bit of it all. Make sure to go check out his podcast on Spotify at The Nerdy Stoner and follow his IG at Nerdy Stoner Pod. This has been this week's Maryland Cannabis Report. I'm Christopher Bright from the Enlightened Voice reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
One of the most fascinating stories that has emerged from the Farm Bill of 2018 is the development of the billion-dollar hemp market. The products are considered legal since they were all created with just 0.3% THC in dry weight, which is the legal definition of hemp. Human behavior, being what it is, has contributed to the development and sale of thousands of hemp products featuring flower, vapes, and edibles. This week, one of the largest MSOs in the world, Curaleaf, has decided to shut down its licensed legal dispensary in West Palm Beach, Florida, and open a hemp-only products store. It's called the Hemp Co. and marks the first all-hemp retail store developed by a multi-state operator in cannabis. The conflict with the overregulated legal cannabis market is now being undermined by a less potent, unregulated hemp product. Our man, who is high on Wall Street, is Doug Miller, and even in these volatile times, Doug manages to find stocks that are ripe for investment right now. Here's Doug.
I'm Doug Miller from High on Wall Street with this week's Cannabis Stock Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Curaleaf opened a new medical cannabis dispensary in Winter Park, Florida, just in time for 420. Curaleaf has a total of 66 stores in Florida and 151 nationwide. This is the biggest week of the year for the industry with 420, so let's see how the biggest MSO is doing. Curaleaf's trading around 98 cents, and it's been running up from that 67-cent area, and it's looking good to continue its way up. The market's been a little choppy, so be sure to trade smart and lock in those profits and enjoy your 420. And that's this week's Cannabis Stock Report. Reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News, I'm Doug Miller.
That'll do it for the B block, and coming up next, more state reports, plus the opening of a new dispensary in Tewksbury, Massachusetts called Lazy River Products. This is their second dispensary to open in the Bay State. Lazy River Products also has a vertical production facility and dispensary in Dracut. As you might expect, a lot of their business comes from over the border in New Hampshire because it's very close to New Hampshire. The Granite State is the only one in New England that still does not have open legal adult use sales, something their neighboring states of Vermont, Massachusetts, and Maine all enjoy. Dispensaries near the New Hampshire border are all booming with consumers from New Hampshire as thousands of dollars leave that state every week as consumers go over the border to get their weed. Cannabis Coast to Coast News continues after this.
What if we're right? What if all of a sudden they discovered that there is medical use for marijuana and that it is good for you and it's better than alcohol and it's better than opioids and it helps your health? What if we're right? What if they find that out?
Specific cannabinoids have medical value. These are facts.
I'm here today in hopes to assist in removing the demonized stigma of cannabis and the perception that cannabis is just about getting high. The true base of this plant has to be known.
I don't think anybody should ever go to jail for cannabis. It's a medicine, and everybody should have access to it.
This is something which, at the very, very least, is the key to alleviating suffering and extending life for millions of human beings. Right? For returning some kind of balance to our society, and quite possibly of restoring our planet's natural balance as well.
Welcome back to Cannabis Coast to Coast News. I'm Alaina Pinto, and this is the C Block, or final section of this week's show. And this is our final reminder to download the free PCM TV app available in the App Store or Google Play. All you have to do is point your camera at the QR code on the screen, and it takes you right there. You can download it for free. So pause this video and do it, and get access to our next show on demand. Up next, we take you to Virginia, where no matter how hard that state advocates for adult use, the sitting governor, Glenn Youngkin, wields his veto pen, not once, but twice, shutting down legalization handed to him from his state's representatives. Now, Youngkin is in the final months of his term, and there are 2 candidates for the vacancy at the end of this year, and both are women. The Republicans have Winsome Earl Sears, and the Democrats have Abigail Spanberger. So either way, there will be history made when either of these women will become the first female governor to be in charge of the Cavalier state. With more from Virginia, here's Joe Parsons.
Hi, I'm Joe Parsons with the Virginia Cannabis Connection by Higher Education's Coffee Talk, sponsored by 97.5 3WB and reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Pro-cannabis media, and especially myself, hope you had an amazing 420 weekend and a happy Easter as well. There is good news to report this holiday from the Commonwealth. The Virginia Democratic candidate for governor, Abigail Spanberger's campaign, released a poll that suggested that she would create a safe marketplace by legalizing adult retail use while cracking down on illegal vape shops. It's also suggested that she would reinvest a large portion to Virginia's schools and their programs. That is a promising sign of what her primary focus will be for her campaign. I myself wish her all the best and hope that this is just one of the many needed changes to the cannabis policy in Virginia. This week on Coffee Talk, we had pro-cannabis media's very own Mark Allen, the Chicago clone guy, to talk about growing, starting clones, and other awesome information and tips to help get that 2025 harvest started. So thanks to Mark and Bird for their help. Now, the key to having a safe and worry-free season is to know the core rules for growing in the Commonwealth. So here are the basics to get you started. Number 1, you can only have 4 plants total, regardless of what state they're in, seedling, vegetation, or flower. So it's best to start with 2 and then plant the other 2 like a month later in case of disease. Or you might get a male plant. That way you don't have to start completely over in case of a disaster. Number 2, all plants must have a label with your name, your address, and strain information. Don't get caught without this one, or you can lose your plants. Number 3, if you're growing outdoors, all plants must not be visible from the road and cannot have public access. Number 4, outdoor grows can only be on your property. If you rent, you cannot, even with a landlord's permission, grow on rental property. However, indoor grows can be on rental property as long as it's not government funded. Number 5, you're able to keep your entire harvest, but you can only have 1 ounce outside of your house, and stem weight does count. So never carry more than 1 ounce outside of your home. And lastly, a personal tip from me. You should always have the same tag information on your bag that you carry as what's on your plant. That way you can prove that what is on your person is from what you've grown. Otherwise, they might try to take your bag and test it and investigate its origin. Follow these tips and you'll have a great season and a plentiful harvest. Well, that's going to do it from this week's Higher Education's Coffee Talk, sponsored by 97.5 3WV and reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. I'm Joe Parsons. Until next time, stay lifted.
There's a lot of hope that the emergence of social consumption lounges will be a solid business model for the future of the cannabis industry in many states. Well, if Nevada is the test case, there's already trouble with sustainability. Tina Tasaka has the story of Smoke and Mirrors, Las Vegas's first social club to open, and now it is the first to close. Here's Tina in Nevada with that and a report from the tribal nations as well.
I'm Tina Tasaka with 420 Technologies, and this is the Nevada and Tribal Nations Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. When one door closes, another opens, but we often look so long and so regretfully upon the closed door that we do not see one which has opened for us. Alexander Graham Bell. Thrive Cannabis Marketplace has shut down Smoke and Mirrors, Nevada's first state-licensed cannabis consumption lounge, just over a year after opening in February 2024. Thrive cited high compliance costs and restrictive regulations as key challenges, saying the current framework doesn't support a sustainable business model. This leaves Dazed at Planet 13 as the only state-regulated lounge in Las Vegas, and Sky High Lounge at New Woo, downtown Las Vegas, run by the Las Vegas Paiute tribe since 2019, operates independently on sovereign land. Thrive plans to repurpose the space for events until regulations improve. Meanwhile, 20 more lounges have conditional approval, but no opening dates. Sessions by the Bay, San Diego's first consumption lounge, is open, and it's tribally owned. Celebrating the opening all weekend for the 420 holiday, the first cannabis lounge is now open in National City. It's 3 stories, 16,000 square feet, featuring a ground floor dispensary, a second floor lounge with gourmet cuisine and THC-infused mocktails, and plans for a rooftop bar with bay views. The lounge offers an immersive art experience, including a 12-room exhibit on cannabis history. To enhance the grand opening festivities, live music artists are being featured each day over the 420 weekend. The Sequan Tribal Development Corporation has partnered with Sessions by the Bay on this project. This tribal entity owns and controls most of the city block on which Sessions by the Bay is located, as well as the nearby Marina Gateway Hotel and the Kimball Coastal Eatery next door. Alex Ayan, owner of Sessions, partnered with the Sequan Tribal Development Corporation, which also owns the U.S. Grant Hotel, the Hotel Solimar, the Singing Hills Golf Resort, as well as their world-class casino resort in El Cajon. That's it for the Nevada highlights and tribal nations. I'm Tina Tasaka with 420 Technologies and Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Please remember to like and subscribe.
Well, here we are on the C Block, and we haven't even mentioned that Sunday, April 20th, was celebrated around the world, not only as Easter Sunday, but the unofficial cannabis holiday. But do you know the origination of 420 and how it all started? Even though there's conflicting information about the official origin, all agree that in 1971, a group of seniors at the San Rafael, California high school used to meet at the Louis Pasteur statue across the street from their high school to enjoy a late afternoon after-school buzz. And now here comes some of the fuzzy details regarding the role of law enforcement in its development. The term 420 was police code for public consumption of cannabis, which, of course, was against the law then and is still a controversy even in some adult use legal states. The group of guys became known as the Waldos, and one of them happened to be friendly with a member of the Grateful Dead rock band. Needless to say, the Dead had a dedicated flower of fans called the Dead Heads, who needed no excuse to fire up and enjoy their favorite plant medicine. The Dead gave it legitimacy and an international stage to spread the word about 420 that has morphed from a time of day to a full day of activities and celebrations. The industry usually has its busiest sales day on 420 with week-long specials and activities, and this year was no different. In Ohio, our correspondent Christina Brisson connected with another friend of Cannabis Coast to Coast News, lobbyist Tim Johnson, and now both are working to gain more acceptance of the plant medicine in their home state. Here's Christina.
Hi, I'm Christina Brisson with Keystone Property Renovations with your weekly Ohio Cannabis Report with Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Recently I had the pleasure of going to the State House for a reading of HB 198, thanks to Tim Johnson, and thank you again for that, Tim. This was just the first reading, an initial brief overview, where they talked a lot about who is going to oversee any such program if anything comes out of it. Now, this program, or this bill, is all about the regulation of anything with Delta 9 in it, as well as permits and licenses, and only selling to those people over the age of 21. They're looking to make sure all the gas stations and small stores are actually selling to adults. Next, there'll be some testimonies, reviews, and witnesses to see if the bill goes any further. They're currently on break. But to top all this off, Grove City has now lost their chance for a dispensary. City Council had approved for 2 locations and rejected both applications. So now the people that were going to put those stores in their city are now looking outside of Franklin County because of all the money they've already lost. And the state has temporarily issued a hold or a pause on permits for Franklin County. So more to come when the House comes back from spring break, and I'm sure more drama with all the political aspect. That is your weekly Ohio Cannabis Report, and I am Christina Brisson with Keystone Property Renovations with Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
In Missouri this week, the regulatory body in the state was busy revoking the micro licenses of dozens of businesses. That didn't stop Brandon Jones, though, from enjoying the plant in his home state.
Hey everybody, it's Brandon Jones with B Green Distribution with Missouri Cannabis Support for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. And I'm live here at 420 Sunny Days. Just put on Extravaganza out here in St. Joseph, Missouri. Inside, we're going to have Mindo Dope performing, and the Dab Stars are doing a giveaway. One of their famous ones at 420 with Nick Woodward and Jonah Tacoma. Both are here in Missouri. As you've kind of noticed, we've been saying up on the laws that have changed here. One new thing that just happened is the micro license market around here saw 25 different licensees lose their license. So we're finding out the actual reasons here in the next coming days, but 25 of the micro licenses all lost their certifications. So we'll figure out what that's going in. And if you aren't familiar, there is a licensed recreational and medical cannabis market that is defined by only a certain number of licensees. And then there was a micro license that was given out as well. Those haven't actually came to fruition or been sold yet, but they are in existence, and 25 of them exactly, lost their licenses this week. On another note, Missouri sales are continuing to rise. We've seen over 100 million every single month here in the state, and we're projecting even higher, up to 125 million with 420 and everything going on in April. There's lots of events going on like this one here where you can consume cannabis and you can also listen to live music. There's a new place that opened in Kansas City where you can also partake in cannabis drinks and watch live music and consume while seeing live music in downtown Kansas City. So everybody, hope you're celebrating in a smart and safe way. Stay medicated and educated. I'm Brandon Jones from B Green Distribution with Missouri Cannabis Support for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Have a great week.
Here in Massachusetts, the market continues to struggle with dozens of dispensaries closing, but there are almost an equal amount of stores that are opening and growing their business footprint. At first glance, the dispensary called Lazy River Products in Dracut does not feature any green in their logo or the word cannabis on their storefront. But that still hasn't stopped that brand from expanding to their second dispensary in Tewksbury, within a few miles of the New Hampshire border. Executive producer Jimmy Young was on hand for the opening of their latest store.
3, 2, 1!
At first glance, you'd never know that Lazy River Products is a cannabis dispensary. After all, there's no green in their logo, or the word cannabis is not on display. But inside, it's got it all. A smell flower bar, a great selection, and a knowledgeable staff.
We knew that we were going to be the ones setting the new standard for excellence in cannabis in Massachusetts. So for us, we really viewed our customers running the gamut of demographics. We knew that we were really catering ourselves and opening ourselves up to everybody. You'll find a lot of people in this space market themselves specifically to that 21 plus age crowd. You know, you walk into the dispensaries and they're playing rap music. And, you know, as a middle-aged, I'm a 51-year-old guy. I've walked into some of these dispensaries and I'm like, I'm a little uncomfortable in here. You know, removing the green and the big pot leaves and the rap music and really, an interesting statistic, and Dean will tell you this, that we've recently been really digging into our data. I'd ask you to guess what you feel might be the average age of our consumer in Dracut.
Well, first of all, I'll be honest, I'm not quite sure I've ever been to Dracut. Okay. So I'm going to guess, however, that it is more of the Canna Curious group, that is the 50-plus group, that is the fastest growing demographic in the industry. Did I guess?
You nailed it. You nailed it, Jimmy. You nailed it.
I'm not just
our average customer is 55 years old.
And now that group has 2 Lazy River Products dispensaries to choose from. Reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News, I'm Jimmy Young in Tewksbury, Massachusetts.
And finally tonight, I think we can all agree that since President Donald Trump has taken over the White House, that there has never been a dull moment. Whether he is creating a trade war with the world or working to deliver peace to either of the wars going on, there's always something to report on. As we reported earlier in this show, more people are anxious since he took over leadership of the country. And according to many polls, those people have increased their own use of the plant medicine to combat the anxiety. Well, now he is working on changing the narrative of his own personality. Trump is, rather. This past week, Kid Rock brokered a meeting between Trump and a longtime critic, comedian Bill Maher. Both were joined by podcast king Joe Rogan and UFC king Dana White. Maher used the moment to announce his change of heart about the president, and it happened on his show on HBO. There's no word on whether that hurt or helped his ratings, but there are plenty of people out there who are disappointed in his sudden about face. Your call. That's this week's Cannabis Coast to Coast News. I'm Alaina Pinto. Remember, it's a whole new world of weed out there. Consume responsibly. Happy Easter. Happy 420. And we will see you next time.
I think I messed up. Did you know there's a place that covers all the cannabis news you need? Welcome to Pro Cannabis Media, your go-to for all things cannabis. PCM is the CNBC of weed, bringing you the latest news and talk shows with a twist. We've got 16 state correspondents and multimedia journalists from around the US and Canada.
Hey everybody, it's Brandon Jones with Be Green Distribution with the Missouri Cannabis Report.
I'm Karen Black from Greenfinger Consulting with the Arizona Cannabis Report.
I'm Amy Carter from Michigan Weedsters.
Andrew Behringer here reporting from Washington, D.C.
Stevie Fazy with the Canadian Toke of the Week.
It all started back in 2018 when founder Jimmy Young kicked off the In the Weeds podcast. His mission? Documenting the fight to end cannabis prohibition. Fast forward to today and we've got Cannabis Coast to Coast with Alaina Pinto, delivering the nation's only TV-style cannabis news show.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Cannabis Coast to Coast, PCM TV's weekly roundup of industry news from California to New York. I'm Alaina Pinto.
As of August 2024, PCM has racked up over 1.2 million views and 14.5 million impressions on our YouTube channel. With 15,000 subscribers and growing, our reach is spreading like wildfire. PCM's website, YouTube, Rumble, Discord, Roku, Twitch, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Apple Podcasts, and even our very own PCM TV app. Get your cannabis news fix with Pro Cannabis Media. We're here to keep you informed and entertained. Stay tuned and stay lifted.